All right, so as the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia continues to break down, Saudi TV, the official government-backed outlet, recently came out with essentially a comedy sketch where they're attempting to roast Joe Biden for, I guess, sort of being this bumbling old man who doesn't really understand what's going on around him. So I wanted to watch this for you guys and then put a little bit more into context in terms of why they would put something like this out in the first place. So let's go ahead and watch this.
Thank you very much. Today, we're going to talk about the crisis in Spain. Yeah, we're going to talk about the crisis in Africa. Yeah, Russia. And I want to talk about the president of Russia, Putin. Putin, listen to me. I have very important message to you. The message is, and the president of China, oh, I didn't finish Russia.
No, sir.
Thank you to correct me, First Lady.
Damn.
Thank you very much. God bless you, and God bless.
Thank you all. Hallelujah. Clap to your president. Clap to your president right now.
All right, so that was fucking weird, right? I mean, honestly, just at a surface level, I mean, they kind of got his ass a little bit if the point is just, yeah, Joe Biden has clearly, obviously, throughout the course of his career, as he's getting up there in age, especially over the last couple of years, he's definitely lost a step. I mean, you can go back and look from just like a decade ago when he was Obama's vice presidential candidate, and if you go watch like the debates with Paul Ryan versus how Joe Biden is right now, he's definitely, very obviously, lost a step, and that's understandable, again, because the dude is like a million fucking years old. But beyond that, beyond just like the surface level of this, and honestly it's like a C+ comedy sketch. I've seen plenty of people do way better impressions of both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, so you know, you did okay. I guess you kind of got his ass, but really the broader thing here that I wanted to focus on is just the context of why Saudi Arabia would put something out like this in the first place. Okay, so again, this is really just a continuation of the ongoing breakdown in relations between the US and Saudi Arabia, and the reasons for that breakdown are pretty much some of the most egregious things that you could possibly imagine. So just to do a little bit of a recap here, if you guys remember back in 2020 when Joe Biden was the presidential candidate, he essentially came out and said that he was going to make Saudi Arabia a pariah state. Okay, he said we are going to treat them as the pariah that they are, and this was coming obviously in the wake of them murdering a Washington Post American resident journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, which the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman had a direct implicated role in perpetuating that murder. So obviously there was a lot of, you know, political incentive for him to come out and take this more hardline stance on Saudi Arabia. They are a violent, theocratic, you know, dictatorship. So obviously you should not be cozying up to them as Donald Trump was doing, or even as Obama was doing. Obviously you should start to maybe rethink this entire relationship. And unfortunately, Joe Biden, when he came out and said some shit like this, right, it was all rhetoric, because we know on the actual substance of how he's treating Saudi Arabia from a policy perspective, or from a foreign policy perspective, that he has essentially not followed through on this promise to make them a pariah state. So just as a reminder here, specifically on the Khashoggi murder, so here from the New York Times, they say Biden won't penalize Saudi Crown Prince over Khashoggi's killing, fearing a relations breach. So essentially, he promised he was going to make them a pariah in a direct response to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and then he turns around once he gets in office and he says, well, you know, never mind, we need this, we need these oil reserves from Saudi Arabia, so I'm not going to try to punish Mohammed bin Salman for committing this murder. So we saw him basically immediately backtrack on the specifics of the Khashoggi situation, but even broader than that, we saw this on the situation in Yemen, because not only did Joe Biden on the campaign trail promise to hold MBS accountable for murdering a U.S. resident and Washington Post journalist, but on top of that, he also promised, if you guys remember, to end the war in Yemen. Now, has the war in Yemen ended? No, and you might turn around and say, well, that's a war that's being, conducted between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia. What role does the United States have to play in this? Well, we play a direct offensive role in this war by our diplomatic, our military, our logistical support for Saudi Arabia's military. military. So just as a reminder here, remember when Biden came out and he basically said, we're no longer going to be selling Saudi Arabia offensive weapons capabilities, okay? And I told you guys right as they made that announcement that it was entirely bullshit, because there is no such thing as only selling them defensive weapons for a war that is inherently offensive, such as the one in Yemen. So just as a reminder here from In These Times, Biden is wrong. There is no such thing as defensive Saudi weapons in the war on Yemen. Biden wants to put a friendlier face on U.S. support for the war. We shouldn't let him. So, of course, Joe Biden continued to give them the weapons support, to give them the military and logistical and information support to continue this war. And not only has he not been opposing it vehemently or telling them to end the war, end the offensive bombing campaigns or the blockade, but he's actively aiding and abetting in this ongoing war, which has killed so far over 400,000 Yemenis, most of them civilians, most of them actually starved as a result of this ongoing Saudi-led blockade of the Hodeidah port in the western portion of Yemen. So not only is he not, pushing for an end to this war, but he's actively aiding and abetting it. And all you need to know to understand the leverage that Biden has over Saudi Arabia is look to where they're getting their military supplies from. So basically their entire air force is being, which is what they're conducting these air raids on Yemen with. Essentially their entire air force is maintained upwards of 90% of it from the United States and the United Kingdom. So us and our closest ally in the UK are directly responsible for the large bulk of what enables Saudi Arabia to conduct this war in the first place. So if you wanted to end the war, you could have just said, instead of half-assing it and saying, I'm going to end offensive support, you could have just ended all military support to Saudi Arabia unless they end the war in Yemen. It could have just been that simple, and you start to apply that diplomatic pressure, you start to apply that international pressure to end something which is considered to be the single worst humanitarian crisis on the planet right now. And, of course, you feel for all of these different situations that are also happening simultaneously, right? Afghani people are being starved simultaneously by the Joe Biden administration. Ukrainian people are being invaded by Vladimir Putin, and obviously those situations are catastrophic, but there's a reason why the situation in Yemen is considered to be the single worst humanitarian crisis on the planet, and that's because, again, over 400,000 people have died as a result of this war so far, and hundreds of thousands of more people, most of them, again, innocent civilians, are set to die in the immediate future if this war and the blockade that Saudi Arabia is enforcing continues. And so this is what Joe Biden has on his hands right now. He has blood on his hands from this war, both in the abstract way that he's supporting this ongoing blockade and the ongoing offensive operations, but also, we're literally selling them weapons that are being used to go bomb innocent Yemeni men, women, and children. This is just a fact. We saw this from that Amnesty International report that came out, that weapons that were given to Saudi Arabia, sold to them by Raytheon, which is the company where Biden's chief of the Pentagon, Lloyd Austin, recently sat on the board of and got $1 million payout as he left Raytheon. This is the same company that's then turning around and getting a multi-million-dollar weapons sale to sell weapons to a theocratic, violent dictatorship that is conducting a genocide in Yemen. Again, the situation here is as clear as possible. So Joe Biden is simultaneously not really cozying up to Saudi Arabia, rhetorically at least, and he's kind of pissing them off in that sense, which could motivate them to come and put out a comedy sketch like this in the first place. But also on the substance of it, while rhetorically you're pushing them away, you're also simultaneously doubling down on the exact same policies that are supporting them. So it's like, on the one hand, you commend his rhetoric, but if it's just empty rhetoric, then it's fucking useless, because you're not improving the conditions for innocent Yemeni civilians that are facing this ongoing offensive campaign and blockade. So he's kind of doing the worst possible approach that you could have possibly asked for, because Saudi Arabia is literally laughing in his face, doing these fucking comedy sketches, making fun of him, and simultaneously doing shit like this that I covered a couple weeks ago. Saudi and Emirati leaders decline calls with Biden during Ukraine crisis. So after all of this, after the ongoing support for their offensive war in Yemen, after refusing to actually hold MBS accountable for murdering a U.S. resident and a Washington Post journalist, after all of that support that Joe Biden has been giving them, it still isn't enough for Saudi Arabia. They're turning around, they're doing comedy sketches, dancing on you, and rejecting your calls as you're trying to get them to release more oil into the global market to drive down to drive down the cost of gas here in the United States. I mean, so again, he's operating this in the worst possible way you could have possibly asked for, both from a foreign policy front and from a domestic political front, and he's really getting absolutely nothing out of it. So the solution here is pretty simple. You shouldn't be trying to cozy up in any way, shape, or form, whether it's diplomatic support, whether it's international pressure, whether it's military or logistical support. You shouldn't be cozying up to authoritarian, dictatorships in the Middle East that are operating these incredibly violent monarchies that are conducting a genocide. I mean, you wouldn't think that that would even need to be said. Seems like that's a pretty baseline thing for somebody who supposedly cares about human rights abuses and cares about the war crimes that are being committed in Ukraine. But then you turn around and you are not only, silent on Saudi war crimes that are being committed and the ongoing blockade that is starving hundreds of thousands of people. You're not only silent, but you are continuing to support it, and you're not even getting anything materially in a geopolitical way. You're not even getting anything in return because they're laughing and spitting in your face doing these comedy sketches and refusing to release oil into the international markets. So it really just begs the question of why the fuck do we even have this relationship with the Saudis if they're just going to be acting like this? I mean, it makes absolutely no sense from a humanitarian perspective, from an economic perspective, from a foreign relations perspective. None of it makes absolutely any sense whatsoever. And you see here from comedy sketches like this that are being thrown out there, Joe Biden has absolutely no coherent strategy whatsoever for any of the handling of Saudi Arabia.